Certain things never truly perish, my friend, especially once darkness falls. Have you ever pondered what happens when ancient European malevolence crosses the ocean and takes root in untouched soil? When creatures from the old world confront America's untamed expanse, where Puritan anxieties collide with frontier practicality, and the very idea of vampirism transforms beneath unfamiliar constellations. Welcome to the blood-soaked annals of American vampire literature, where primal hunger meets New World ambition. This evening, we bypass the Gothic castles of Transylvania to instead explore Salem's colonial cemeteries, Louisiana's antebellum plantations, the mining camps of the Wild West, and the neon-lit streets of modern cities, where immortal predators stalk under the glow of electric lights. I am Obsidian Vault, your navigator through territories where the undead roam beneath a different moon. Vampires born not from European nobility, but from American soil. Beings shaped by slavery and liberation, by manifest destiny and the American dream twisted into an eternal nightmare. From the Puritan terrors of colonial New England to the corporate monsters of modern fiction, we will explore 10 tales that show how vampire literature became uniquely, dreadfully American. These stories reflect our nation's deepest anxieties and darkest cravings, the price of immortality in a land built on both hope and horror. Subscribe to join our expedition into American Gothic terror and leave a comment telling us which American vampire tale has left its mark on your soul. Now, let us begin our journey through the blood-stained pages of the New World's most frightening literature. The Mercy Brown Incident, Puritan Vampires, New England Folk Vampirism. In the harsh winter of 1892, as snow covered the frozen ground of Exeter, Rhode Island, a community's desperate fear led to an act, so barbaric that its echoes would linger in American folklore for generations. This is the story of Mercy Brown, New England's last vampire, and the dark tradition that preceded her by 2 centuries. Imagine the brutal landscape of colonial New England, where Puritan theology cast long shadows over communities struggling to survive in an unforgiving wilderness. In those small farming towns where everyone knew their neighbor's sins, tuberculosis was known by a more poetic and terrifying name: consumption. This disease seemed to devour its victims from within, leaving them pale, weak, and wasting away, as if some invisible force were draining their very life essence. The Brown family of Exeter had already buried Father George Brown's wife, Mary, when the illness claimed their daughter, Mary Olive, in 1888. But it was young Edwin Brown, barely 19 years old, whose worsening condition drove the family to desperate measures. As Edwin wasted away through the winter of 1891, something strange began happening in the village. Neighbors reported seeing Mary Olive walking through the cemetery at night, her burial dress fluttering in the wind like torn wings. Others claimed they heard voices calling from the Brown family plot, pleading for warmth, for life, for blood. Most disturbing of all, Edwin began speaking in his delirium of dreams where his dead sister visited him. She sat on his chest, stealing his breath with cold kisses that left him weaker each morning. When Mercy Brown, Edwin's remaining sister, succumbed to the same wasting disease in January 1892, the community's fear reached a breaking point. Dr. Harold Metcalf, the local physician, had studied in Boston and understood tuberculosis as a bacterial infection. But Metcalf was a lone voice against generations of folk wisdom that whispered of darker explanations. On the 17th of March, 1892, a crowd gathered in Chestnut Hill Cemetery. Their breath steaming in the frigid air, they prepared to perform a ritual that their grandparents had whispered about, but hoped never to witness. Led by Edwin's father, and sanctioned by desperate community leaders, they came to exhume the Brown family dead. Mary Brown, buried first, had decomposed naturally in her grave. Mary Olive, dead 4 years, showed the expected signs of decay. But when they opened Mercy Brown's grave, the crowd gasped in horror and amazement. Despite 2 months in the frozen ground, her body showed little decomposition. Her skin retained a lifelike pallor. Her nails appeared to have grown. And most damning of all, when they turned her over, blood flowed from her mouth. "Vampire!" someone shouted, the word cutting through the winter air like a blade. The crowd pressed closer, their faces twisted with fear and terrible purpose. Yea, here was their answer, their explanation for the wasting disease that had claimed so many of their children. Here was evil faced with corruption in a form they could obliterate. What unfolded next would haunt the community for generations. Adhering to a folk custom predating Christianity, they extracted Mercy's heart and liver, then kindled a blaze upon an adjacent stone. As those organs burned, releasing bitter smoke into the overcast sky, they gathered the cinders and blended them with water. This grisly potion was transported to Edwin's bedside, where his father compelled him to consume the remnants of his sibling's heart. They believed this rite would shatter the vampire's hold over the dying youth. Yet Edwin Brown succumbed to tuberculosis merely 2 months later, his last words reportedly being, "She still comes to me. She absolves us, but she still comes." Dr. Medaf chronicled the whole affair in his diary, noting, "I have witnessed today a display of ignorance and superstition that would be deemed unworthy of the Dark Ages. Nevertheless, I cannot deny that phenomena exist which medical science cannot yet explain. And the terror of the community was authentic, born of experiences that defy logical explanation. The Mercy Brown incident represents the peak of American vampire folklore, which evolved independently of European traditions. In New England, vampires were not aristocratic predators, but rather family members who returned from death to drain the life force of their loved ones. These were intimate horrors rooted in the guilt and desperation of communities watching their children die from diseases they could neither comprehend nor heal. The New England vampire tradition mirrored uniquely American fears: the dread of the wilderness, the conflict between religious faith and folk superstition, and the profound isolation of frontier settlements. Unlike European vampires who embodied foreign threats, American vampires emerged from within the family, from within the community, rendering them far more psychologically unsettling. Mercy Brown's tale inspired later American vampire literature, influencing authors such as H.P. Lovecraft, who tapped into New England's grim history for his cosmic horror narratives. The motif of a community turning against one of its own, of relatives forced to destroy what they cherished to preserve what remained, became a recurring theme in American Gothic literature. The rock upon which Mercy Brown's heart was incinerated still endures in Exeter, Rhode Island, though vegetation has overgrown it, and visitors must hunt to locate it. Local inhabitants report that even now, on winter nights when the temperature plunges below freezing, strange lights can be observed flickering near the old graveyard, and some claim to hear a young woman's voice calling through the wind. Was Mercy Brown genuinely a vampire, or merely the casualty of communal hysteria fueled by grief and ignorance? The answer may matter less than what her story reveals about the American psyche, our propensity to turn against our own when confronted with inexplicable loss, our urge to find human explanations for cosmic horror, and our capacity for both love and cruelty in the face of death. In New England's frozen earth, the seeds of American vampire literature were sown in blood and despair, evolving into a tradition that would eventually span the continent and take forms Mercy Brown's tormentors could never have envisioned. Plantation Blood, an interview with the vampire Anne Rice and the Southern Gothic tradition. From moss-draped cemeteries in New Orleans to crumbling antebellum mansions across the South, vampire literature discovered its most refined and psychologically intricate expression. Here, Anne Rice revolutionized the vampire narrative, transforming monsters into philosophers and predators into tragic heroes, wrestling with the burden of eternal existence. Imagine New Orleans in 1791, a city where French elegance mingles with Caribbean mysticism, Catholic guilt clashes with pagan sensuality, and the boundaries between life and death blur like watercolors in the humid air. In this intoxicating atmosphere, we meet Louis de Pointe-du-Lac, a young plantation owner whose transformation into a vampire becomes a meditation on morality, solitude, and the terrible cost of immortality. Louis's story begins with human tragedy, the death of his brother Paul, a religious mystic whose visions of angels led to a fatal fall from the plantation house roof. Overwhelmed by guilt and believing himself responsible for Paul's death, Louis sinks into such profound despair that he courts death through reckless behavior, frequenting the dangerous back alleys of New Orleans in search of an end to his suffering. It is in one such alley that he encounters Lestat de Lioncourt, a vampire whose beauty conceals a predatory nature as ancient as European aristocracy. But Lestat is no mere monster. He is a creature of contradictions, capable of both tender affection and casual cruelty, embodying the seductive danger that America has always represented to the Old World. "You wish for death?" Lestat observes, his voice carrying traces of a French accent refined by centuries of existence. "But what if I offered you something far more intriguing? What if I offered you eternal life, but with a price that would render death seem like mercy?" The vampire's kiss that transforms Lewis is depicted with an eroticism that shocked 1970s readers and established a new template for vampire literature. This isn't the savage neck-biting of older traditions. It's a fluid exchange that hints at both erotic encounter and sacred ritual. Rice's vampires don't merely drink blood. They merge consciousnesses, experiencing their victims' memories, emotions, and final moments with an almost spiritual intensity. Yet, immortality brings its own unexpected agonies. Louis discovers that vampiric existence doesn't free him from human concerns, but amplifies them. His heightened senses turn every experience into an overwhelming assault. A human heartbeat roars like thunder, and the scent of mortality becomes both intoxicating and maddening. Most tragically, his transformation preserves his human conscience, turning every feeding into a moral dilemma. Lestat, in contrast, embraces his predatory side with aristocratic indifference, viewing humans as livestock. Their lives only matter as nourishment for superior beings. When Louis struggles with the morality of killing, Lestat responds with the reasoning of a natural predator. "Evil is a point of view, my friend. We are immortal, and before us lie the abundant feasts awaiting us. But you must accept your nature, or you will never find peace." The bond between Louis and Lestat evolves into a tangled dance of dependency and disgust, love and resentment. Lestat acts as both creator and destroyer, granting Louis eternal life while gradually eroding his humanity. Their domestic life in the Rue Royale townhouse mimics a traditional marriage, complete with arguments, reconciliations, and the shared care of their daughter. The child vampire Claudia may be Rice's most chilling invention, a 5-year-old girl forever trapped in a child's body, yet possessing the accumulated knowledge of a vampire and a growing hunger for independence. Her very existence raises questions that haunt the entire story. What does it mean to be human? Can evil wear the mask of innocence? How does immortality reshape identity itself? Claudia's creation occurs during a plague in New Orleans, when Louis, driven by loneliness and Lestat's manipulation, feeds on a dying child. Her transformation becomes both salvation and damnation. She is saved from disease but condemned to eternal childhood, forever dependent on her vampire fathers, yet increasingly bitter about their control. Claudia's rebellion against Lestat years later forces Louis to confront the true nature of vampire existence. When she attempts to kill Lestat by poisoning him with the blood of twin boys she has fed to him, she reveals a coldness and cruelty that even Louis finds shocking. Her plan nearly succeeds. Lestat weakens to the brink of death, allowing Louis and Claudia to dump his body in the swamp. But vampires, they learn, are far harder to destroy than humans imagine. Lestat returns, scarred and wounded, his beautiful features marred but his core nature unchanged. The confrontation that follows shatters their makeshift family forever, sending Louis and Claudia fleeing to Europe in search of others like them. In the Old World, they discover the Théâtre des Vampires in Paris, where vampires perform staged deaths for human audiences too sophisticated to believe in real supernatural danger. Led by the ancient Armand, these European vampires embody a different tradition, communal rather than solitary, theatrical rather than secretive, organized around rituals and hierarchies absent among American vampires. Armand himself becomes another father figure for Louis, offering knowledge and companionship that Lestat never provided. But his interest in Louis comes at a terrible cost. The vampire community sees Claudia as an abomination, a violation of natural law that cannot be allowed to exist. Her destruction by the theater vampires becomes the final tragedy, stripping Louis of all connection to others and leaving him truly alone for the first time in his immortal life. The interview format framing Louis's narrative serves multiple purposes. By having him tell his story to a modern journalist, Rice creates distance between readers and the vampire's crimes, while simultaneously making his loneliness immediate and tangible. The journalist becomes our surrogate, asking the questions we would ask, reacting with the horror and fascination we would feel. Yet the journalist's final desire to be transformed into a vampire, despite hearing Louis's tale of suffering, reveals the seductive power of the vampire myth. Even knowing the cost, humans still crave immortality, still believe they could handle eternity better than those who have experienced it. This irony becomes a commentary on American optimism itself, our faith that we can overcome any obstacle, solve any problem, transcend any limitation. Anne Rice's achievement was to make vampires fully American while respecting their European origins. Her vampires are immigrants forced to adapt to New World realities, aristocrats obliged to function in a democratic society, ancient beings confronting modern technology and shifting social values. They embody the American experience of reinvention while carrying the weight of Old World traditions. The New Orleans setting functions as more than mere backdrop. It becomes a character in its own right, with the city's unique blend of French, Spanish, African, and Anglo cultures, creating an atmosphere where the supernatural feels natural. Where vampires can exist alongside voodoo practitioners, fortune tellers, and other practitioners of occult arts, Rice's vampires also reflect distinctly American anxieties about class, race, and sexuality. Louis's plantation background raises uncomfortable questions about vampires as slave owners. What does it mean for an immortal predator to own human beings? How does the vampire's relationship to human mortality change when some humans are already considered property? During a time when American society was starting to confront changing views on sexuality, the homoerotic undercurrents in Rice's vampire relationships became apparent. The intense, the deep emotional connections among male vampires, their physical closeness while feeding, and their household setups all defied conventional notions of manhood and longing. With Interview with the Vampire, Rice redefined vampires as America's most intricate psychological fiends, beings able to engage in philosophy, romance, and authentic ethical dilemmas. Rice's vampires are not merely symbols of mortality or carnal hunting. Instead, they personify the timeless mysteries that plague humanity. What purpose does life serve? How does one cope with loneliness? And what sacrifice are we ready to make for our deepest wishes? The triumph of Rice's Vampire Chronicles generated many copycats and cemented New Orleans as the nation's vampire hub, a label the city proudly flaunts with its usual panache. Guided tours take tourists around the French Quarter, highlighting spots from the books, as nearby enterprises exploit the vampire allure through theme-based eateries, stores, and amusements. Yet past monetary gain, Interview with the Vampire revolutionized the perception of vampires in American society. These vampires are not alien intruders or thoughtless beasts. Instead, they are intricate beings, wrestling with the weight of everlasting life in a human realm. They embody American ideals carried to their ultimate conclusion. Individualism morphs into solitude, the chase for delight becomes eternal craving, and liberation from old bonds turns into liberation from purpose. In Louis's parting remarks to the journalist, we perceive the very voice of America, eternally youthful but aged in wisdom, alluring yet rapacious, promising boundless opportunities while exacting a matching limitless cost. Bear in mind that my words are not for teaching but for relating. The decision, as ever, rests with you. Feasting in the grit near the shadowy and western vampires, blood of the frontier, and predators of the desert. When vampires encounter the American frontier, Gothic fortresses dissolve into nothing, and old-world European customs morph into something as savage and unbridled as the terrain. Across the boundless stretches of the American West, where justice is merely what one can impose, and staying alive requires swiftness, trickery, and brutality, vampire clans cruise the roads akin to renegade bands, transforming the allure of the open highway into a perpetual hunting horror. Envision the Hooker clan. These are not noble European vampires steeped in centuries of polish, but beings spawned from American brutality, and molded by frontier savagery. Jesse Hooker, the Klan leader, underwent his change amid the Civil War. His human end took place on a battlefield where kin fought kin, and the ground soaked up blood like downpour. His resurrection as a vampire happened not in a Gothic manner, but in a Confederate medical tent, where a mortally wounded Confederate nurse, herself newly turned, decided to rescue him from dying by granting him something far more dreadful. The Hooker clan roams the American Southwest in a 1973 Winnebago and a beat-up Cadillac, shifting from place to place like a distorted imitation of itinerant laborers. However, rather than tracking harvest cycles, they chase the night. They prey in tiny towns where unfamiliar faces go unnoticed, and missing persons alerts could take weeks to cross into neighboring counties. May, the most youthful member of the family, epitomizes the alluring side of American vampirism. She possesses the untamed appeal of a folk musician and the hunting cunning of a coyote. At home, whether in a rowdy roadside bar or tailing quarry across dry creek beds. Upon meeting Caleb Colton, an Oklahoma farm boy, she perceives not merely a meal, but a chance to infuse new blood into their wandering household. Caleb's metamorphosis happens in a motel room near Tucumcari, New Mexico, surrounded by neon signs boasting color, television, and air conditioning. Such contemporary comforts cannot conceal the age-old ceremony unfolding inside. May's fangs do not create the refined puncture marks of European customs. Instead, she feeds with the ferocity of a beast suited to American conditions. She rips into his neck with teeth designed for practicality over grace. Her feeding, frantic, reflects the ceaseless movement of frontier existence. Yet vampirism in the American West brings its own peculiar hurdles. No handy fortresses offer refuge from the sun, nor are there old tombs where vampires can slumber securely during the scorching day. The Hooker family must perpetually relocate, searching for protection. Derelict structures, roadway tunnels, and cave systems, perpetually eluding dawn and authorities. Sever, the family's most brutal member, epitomizes the frontier mindset twisted into something grotesque. He attires himself like a cowboy from a spaghetti western, complete with leather, chaps, and a Stetson, yet his armaments are otherworldly swiftness and force, not old six-shooters. His feeding style contains no hint of civility. He rips into prey with the zeal of someone who has never paused to doubt his urges. "Hell, I've been dead for 25 years, Sever says, his drawl bearing the grit of numerous states. "But I've never felt more alive than when I'm feeding. You city vampires with your refined etiquette and remorse, you're overlooking the truth. We're top predators, and America is the greatest hunting ground. No deity has ever shaped such a being. The clan's methods of feeding expose the grim reality concealed within American movement. They prey upon the defenseless, hitchhikers, runaways, adolescents, seasonal laborers, individuals whose vanishings will not face rigorous inquiry. Their preferred locations include truck stops, seedy bars, and desolate road segments where cries travel no farther than the dry breeze. Diamondback, the oldest of the clan besides Jesse, acts as keeper of history and thinker of their strange way of life. He recalls the era when the frontier was genuinely untamed, when blood drinkers could prey publicly on voyagers and attribute it to native attacks or savage beasts. But in the present period of cross-country roads and wireless transmission, they have to exercise greater caution and pick their victims with care. There was a time, Diamondback muses while crossing the colorful wasteland, when a bloodsucker could settle in a mining settlement and feast for many months before raising any alarm. These days, there are federal enforcers, state police, and bureau investigators, all linked through radio frequencies and phone networks. The advancements of today's society render it much more difficult to be a creature of the night. Caleb and May's connection evolves into a perverse love story, embodying American dreams tainted by paranormal truth. May pledges to Caleb liberation from his tedious existence on the farm, excitement along endless highways, and an eternal affection that will never fade. However, the cost involves not only his human essence, but also his involvement in the group's brutality. Caleb's inner battle with his transformed self mirrors distinct American fears regarding personal autonomy and ethical duty. Within European tales of vampires, metamorphosis frequently entails entering old structures of power and embracing fixed functions. Yet American undead are supposed to carve their own direction, personally determining what type of fiend they shall embody. The clan's trip to a roadside bar for sustenance highlights how blood-sucking merges with America's nighttime social scene. The dive comprises cowboys, truck drivers, and petroleum laborers, individuals who exist roughly and perish early, even without otherworldly interference. As the vampires launch into their feeding craze, the savagery melds effortlessly into the tavern's ambiance of masculinity and hostility. Yet Caleb struggles to accept the murder with the same ease his new clan demands. Nurtured with principles of defending the blameless and advocating for the vulnerable, he discovers he cannot join in the massacre of helpless souls. His defiance against the group's standards generates friction that risks shattering the kinship. Jesse says to Caleb amid a clash at a deserted filling station, "It's us or it's them. There's no compromise in this existence. You hunt alongside the clan, or you're no kin at all." The peak arrives when Caleb's human relatives, his dad and little sister, find him, resolved to rescue him from what they see as a menacing sect. The clash between the bloodsuckers and Caleb's biological household serves as an allegory for the struggle of conventional American ethics against the frontier's shifting morals. The downfall of the Hooker clan happens not by classic vampire-slaying techniques, but through employing Yankee practical thinking and overwhelming weaponry. Caleb's dad, a combat veteran schooled in aggression during Vietnam, tackles the undead issue as if it were a military mission: superior strategy, advanced arms, and readiness to apply massive force. The concluding confrontation unfolds inside a blazing inn near daybreak, with solar rays acting as both armament and time limit. The vampire's otherworldly powers turn out to be less crucial than anticipated when confronting adversaries familiar with U.S. military methods: separate and overwhelm, capitalize on flaws, and never allow the foe to regroup. May meets her end while attempting to find cover, her form igniting when the initial morning beams strike her flesh. Yet her perishing does not resemble the theatrical fading of old-world vampire lore. She incinerates like any mortal being, crying out in agony and fear. Her otherworldly essence provides no defense against the fundamental laws of fire. Caleb is rescued thanks to May's ultimate expression of devotion. She employs her flaming self to block the sun's rays just enough for him to get to a secure spot. Her selflessness enables him to last until dusk, when his dad shows up with a blood transfer that undoes his metamorphosis. The clinical treatment that rescues him mirrors America's trust in scientific and technological solutions, even for paranormal predicaments. The Western bloodsucker heritage depicted in Near Dark embodies distinctly U.S. motifs of movement, brutality, and ethical haziness. These undead are not constrained by age-old customs or European noble systems. They are monsters of their own making, designing their own regulations and abiding by frontier reasoning. They represent the shadow aspect of American self-reliance, revealing the outcome when the adventurous mindset is separated from any feeling of communal duty. The southwestern wasteland transcends mere backdrop. It evolves into a persona that influences undead conduct. The immense barren regions permit dramatic brutality without onlookers, whereas the severe terrain forges bloodsuckers tailored for endurance instead of refinement. These are wiry, famished hunters, developed for an arid, starving territory. The car-centered way of life that characterizes contemporary American existence gains fresh significance when blood drinkers turn into roving road hunters. The vehicle functions as both haven and tool, providing shielding from the sun while facilitating swift travel across feeding territories. America's deep passion for the open highway turns into a terrifying ordeal when the road promises not liberation, but constant hunting. By reshaping vampires from European nobles into American renegades, Western vampire stories invent creatures that mirror the traits of our nation: aggressive, nomadic, self-reliant, and forever evolving. These vampires are perfectly adapted to a country where flexibility outweighs heritage, and the past is meant to be fled from instead of cherished. The vampire of the frontier serves as a dark reminder that America's westward expansion was founded on brutality and uprooting. The allure of the endless highway frequently hid harsh truths, and the liberty to transform oneself could easily turn into the license to discard every ethical boundary. Along the infinite roads of the American desert, where society fades away into vast nothingness, vampires discovered their ideal feeding territory, and America encountered its ideal demons. Urban Decline, I Am Legend, and Biological Vampirism, Richard Matheson's. A glimpse into the aftermath. During the nuclear era, when Americans became terrified of unseen radiation and the threat of worldwide annihilation, vampire fiction changed to capture these fresh fears. Richard Matheson's I Am Legend portrayed vampirism not as a mystical affliction, but as a microbial disease, turning Los Angeles into a desolate, post-apocalyptic landscape where classic Gothic terror converged with contemporary science fiction. Visualize Robert Neville, the sole remaining human in a realm swarming with vampires, confined inside his suburban house as night descends upon a lifeless metropolis. Beyond his barricades, the beings that used to be his friends and neighbors hammer on his door and windows, shouting his name in familiar voices, begging him to become part of their transformed world. Inside his home, Neville clings to the rituals of ordinary existence, preparing meals, spinning classical music, sipping whiskey to dull the agony of complete solitude. According to Matheson's narrative, the change started with a worldwide plague in the 1970s that converted humans into beings exhibiting every classic sign of vampirism: an allergy to sunlight, terror of garlic and reflective surfaces, and vulnerability to wooden stakes piercing the heart. Yet Matheson's brilliance was in giving rational reasons for supernatural events, crafting vampires that were at once contemporary and timeless, logical and horrifying. Neville's daily schedule exposes the soul-crushing terror of utter isolation. Every morning, once the vampires seek refuge from lethal sunlight, he leaves his stronghold to track and destroy them across Los Angeles's abandoned roads. Equipped with sharpened wood and a biological understanding of vampire anatomy, he systematically eliminates the beings he previously knew as companions and neighbors. "Another day," Neville mutters while stacking stakes into his station wagon. "Another group of neighbors to kill." He is fully aware of the cruel irony. In this reality where he alone remains human, each vampire he slays was once a familiar person. The postman who brought his letters, the lady who served at the local market, the kids who frolicked on his block. Matheson's vampires hold on to enough of their human past to recall their previous existence, which makes Neville's mission even more emotionally crushing. They shout to him with names and recollections from the time before the epidemic, invoking bonds and mutual memories that are now meaningless in their altered state. Ruth, a female Neville meets, who declares herself another living survivor, serves as the emotional core of his tale and eventually the catalyst for his most shocking insight. Their bond evolves gradually and cautiously, as two individuals who have unlearned trust gradually discover solace in one another's company. However, Ruth harbors a hidden truth that will shatter Neville's perception of his own purpose in this changed reality. The rational structure Matheson builds for his vampires mirrors the fears of the 1950s regarding biological weapons, atomic residue, and the unforeseen outcomes of technological advancement. The vampire outbreak began with atmospheric disruptions triggered by nuclear experiments, unleashing primeval microbes that had been suspended in the planet's upper atmosphere for thousands of years. This microbial vampirism generates beings that are neither completely alive nor truly dead, occupying a condition that science can study but cannot neatly classify. Neville's investigation into the vampire state turns into an all-consuming fixation, compelling him to conduct tests on captured vampires in his underground lab. In hopes of finding a remedy that could bring back his vanished world, the bacterium, as Neville reads in his research logs, forms a symbiotic bond with the host, granting superhuman physical abilities while drastically changing brain chemistry and metabolic functions. The being keeps human memories and intellect but forfeits the ability to form normal emotional connections and ethical judgment. His tests show that vampires are not uniform. Some hold on to more human traits than others. Some can endure brief periods in sunlight. Some are less responsive to classic repellents like garlic and crucifixes. This variation indicates that the microbial infection affects each person's distinct biological makeup in different ways, producing a range of vampire states instead of one consistent metamorphosis. The mental toll of Neville's condition transcends simple solitude. He is compelled to be both attacker and victim, pursuer and pursued the final. An emissary of a species that has vanished. His grip on reality relies on preserving human habits and principles in a realm where those ideas are now irrelevant. His bond with classical music grows, especially moving. The albums he puts on every night act as a link to human civilization and accomplishment. Reminders that his kind once produced art instead of merely draining life. The melodies also drown out the noises outside the cries of vampires who are masters at manipulating his deepest emotional vulnerabilities. From the shadows, they summon Robert using the familiar tones of his deceased wife and child. "We're here for you. We long for your presence. Don't you wish to be reunited with us?" The torment of these cries is rooted in their underlying reality. Dying would truly bring him back to his family, putting an end to his loneliness and pain. Neville's fortified dwelling stands as an emblem of civilization battling against overwhelming odds. Each window is sealed with crucifixes and garlic-laden defenses. All entry points are strengthened to withstand otherworldly force. This structure embodies the final stronghold of human principles in a reality that has evolved beyond such ideals. Yet this fortress also acts as a cage, keeping Neville from experiencing genuine life. The shocking discovery that Ruth is indeed a vampire belonging to an advanced generation that can endure brief exposure to sunlight and merge scientific knowledge with vampiric nature completely reshapes the story. Ruth embodies evolution in motion, the subsequent stage in vampire existence that Neville's inflexible mindset refuses to acknowledge. "We aren't the monstrosities, Robert," Ruth reveals in their last showdown. "You are. We have mastered the art of coexistence, building an entirely fresh society. However, you remain a remnant, an artifact from bygone times that rejects adaptation. From our perspective, you are the nightmare, the entity that hunts us under daylight and slays us in our slumber." The vampires for whom Ruth stands have established a thriving civilization, complete with rules, traditions, and innovations tailored to their transformed life. Rather than preying on humans, they now produce artificial blood. They have created methods to enable brief exposure to sunlight and erected communal frameworks that grant the togetherness and direction Neville craves. Once exposed as an obstacle to their advancement, Neville's demise at the hands of this advanced vampire society is unavoidable. Yet Matt allows him a fleeting insight before his end. He understands that he is now the fiend in their folklore, the mythic being that young ones are raised to dread, the bogeyman symbolizing the perilous history that must be surpassed. I am legend. As death approaches, Neville reflects, grasping at last that he will be etched into history as the demon of vampire myth, not as the champion of humanity's endurance. His legacy will be that of the final member of a savage race that resisted transformation, rather than the righteous guardian of society he once imagined. Matt's masterstroke in I Am Legend was fashioning vampires that embodied both scientific and otherworldly traits, blending the contemporary with the archaic, the pitiable with the horrifying. The microbial origin he attributes to vampirism does not lessen the terror. Instead, it enhances believability, urgency, and menace for modern audiences. The Los Angeles urban landscape proves vital to the tale's effect. We are not dealing with a secluded European hamlet where old superstitions remain potent. Rather, it is America's most cutting-edge metropolis, reduced to a desolate landscape of drained pools and forsaken malls. The fall of Los Angeles mirrors the collapse of American hope and consumerism. This narrative captures Cold War fears regarding germ warfare, radioactive fallout, and the prospect that technological advancement could drive humanity to annihilation instead of betterment. Neville's solitude echoes the mental condition of Americans, enduring the perpetual menace of nuclear obliteration, going through daily motions while aware that society dangles by an extremely fragile cord. Matt's vampires further symbolize the dread of societal transformation prevalent in 1950s America. The advanced vampire community Ruth depicts personifies concerns over integration, social development, and the chance that classic American ideals may grow outdated. Neville's opposition to vampire civilization mirrors conservative pushback against civil rights, social progression, and cultural metamorphosis. the numerous movie versions of I Am Legend, the film adaptations highlight the tale's lasting significance, showing how every era finds its own meaning in the themes. The 1971 Omega Man highlighted conflicts between races and urban deterioration. The 2007 Will Smith rendition concentrated on genetic manipulation and germ warfare. Each new version modernizes the science while keeping the emotional weight of total solitude intact. The influence of I Am Legend reaches well past stories of vampires into the wider domain of post-apocalyptic narratives. Matt's concept of a lone survivor, preserving human qualities despite immense adversity, set a precedent. This blueprint has inspired numerous later creations, ranging from The Walking Dead to 28 Days Later. Yet perhaps the most crucial contribution is that I Am Legend depicted vampires as beings capable of development, adjustment, and transformation, not stuck in old customs. Matt's vampires herald an era where the distinction between man and monster grows ever more unclear. In such a future, staying alive hinges not on clinging to outdated classifications, but on embracing new truths. During his last breaths, Robert Neville ingests the lethal capsules given by Ruth, avoiding a communal execution. This marks the conclusion of one form of American heroism and the emergence of a different one. The solitary fighter battling insurmountable challenges alone grows irrelevant in a realm demanding collaboration and flexibility. The final human on the planet discovers too belatedly that solitude, no matter how honorable, cannot rival the strength of a community, no matter how unconventional. In Neville's world, the desolate boulevards of Los Angeles foreshadow a future of urban deterioration that would later define many American cities. Deserted malls and hushed roadways mirror fears of suburban loneliness and the vulnerability of consumer society. There's also a chilling thought. Perhaps the American dream itself is merely a latent virus, poised to morph into a waking nightmare. At the heart of this story lie teenage bloodlust, the lost boys, and youth culture. American vampires embody perpetual adolescence on the radiant, neon-soaked shores of Santa Clara, California, where the Pacific collides with the most indulgent yearnings of the American dream. A powerful force forever reshaped vampire literature. Teenage rebellion. The Lost Boys epitomized a fresh type of American vampire, youthful, permanently hip, and utterly freed from the ethical limits that bound their forebears. Imagine Michael Emerson, a teen newcomer from Phoenix, cruising on his bike along the Santa Clara boardwalk at sunset over the Pacific. The California coastline stretches before him as a vow of liberation. Arcade lights blaze in neon hues, and rock music thunders from each shop. Youths with untamed hair and even wilder dispositions stalk the pier like gorgeous hunters. Yet Santa Clara conceals a shadow far deeper than its infamous title as the global murder capital. The flyers for missing individuals plastered on every pole only hint at the truth. Those teens who vanish are not fleeing, they are prey. They are being enlisted into something that erases them in manners their loved ones could never fathom. David, the platinum blonde chief of the Lost Boys, personifies all that 1980s American teens longed to be: perilous, magnetic, and wholly independent of grown-up rule. His motorcycle roars like thunder. A black leather jacket flares behind him, reminiscent of wings. He leads a pack of adherents who revere him with the fervor typically given to rock idols. Snooze all day, celebrate all night, stay forever young, never perish. David assures Michael on their first meeting. Being a vampire is a blast. This carefree perspective on everlasting doom mirrors a distinctively American view of supernatural change. Vampirism is presented not as a curse or celestial retribution, but as the supreme lifestyle decision. The Lost Boys' hideout under the remnants of a majestic hotel exposes how vampire life merges with American consumerism. The undead have outfitted their subterranean lair with pilfered items, arcade machines, bikes, and leather coats. They hoard limitless junk food, even though they can no longer metabolize it. Their eternal life transforms into a limitless spending binge, bankrolled by their paranormal powers. Marco, the group's disheveled artist, adorns their cavern with purloined rock posters and graffiti glorifying violence and defiance. His change into a vampire hasn't dampened his artistic drive. if anything, everlasting life, has granted him boundless hours to refine his creative vision. Yet his creations now portray acts of violence and feeding, exposing the predator lurking beneath his youthful veneer. Paul and Dwayne, the remaining cohorts in David's crew, personified diverse facets of American youth culture twisted by vampirism. Paul is the party beast, boisterous, combative, perpetually chasing fresh excitement to occupy the interminable void of never-ending life. Dwayne is the quiet, powerful stereotype, a James Dean insurgent, whose undead might renders him far more menacing than any human version. The feeding habits of these vampires demonstrate how they've tailored age-old hunting to modern America, rather than trailing prey across Gothic estates or European hamlets. They stalk prey at gigs, shore gatherings, and dance clubs where blaring tunes and strobe lights conceal the noises of attack. Their targets are other teens, runaways, revelers, and adrenaline junkies, individuals who won't be noticed gone until the moment is lost. Michael's slow metamorphosis kicks off when David hands him a wine bottle, supposedly containing blood, as part of an initiation ceremony for what seems like a mere teenage clique. "Drink," David orders, his tone laced with otherworldly coercion veiled as peer influence. "What lengths are you ready to reach, Michael?" The blood is sweet initially, then grows ever more habit-forming, as Michael's mortal senses adapt to the new demands. Yet the scientific vampirism of Matthew has yielded to something else, a more occult change carried out via ceremony and volition, not simple contagion. Michael has to actively decide to turn into a vampire, turning his fall into an issue of personal choice rather than happenstance. His bodily alterations reflect common adolescent fears, magnified to paranormal extremes. Michael's enhanced power and hostility win him favor with girls and cause enemies to dread him, yet they also alienate him from his relatives and past companions. He can no longer bear daylight, compelling him to rest throughout the day and venture out solely after sundown. His palate shifts, turning ordinary meals to ash on his tongue, while the aroma of blood grows irresistible. The Frog Brothers Edgar and Allan embody the flip side of 1980s teen culture, dorky comic enthusiasts who taught themselves undead mythology through terror comics and low-budget horror films. What grown-ups brush aside as adolescent make-believe turns out to be essential once Santa Carla's vampire menace emerges into the open. "We are warriors, Michael," Edgar proclaims, holding up a stake whittled from a baseball bat. "We always knew this moment would arrive, the moment we must decide between preserving our humanity or surrendering to the shadows. And our choice is to resist." Their arsenal is cobbled together from everyday teenage possessions: water pistols loaded with blessed water, stakes whittled from baseball bats, and mirrors taken from mom's makeup kit. They reinvent vampire slaying, shifting it from a nobleman's hobby to a display of blue-collar creativity, employing Yankee inventiveness to fight off paranormal evil. Furthermore, how the vampires interact with modern tech demonstrates their assimilation into present-day American culture. Rather than morphing into bats, they cruise on motorbikes and blast stereos to hide the noises of their feeding. Video rental shops become their hunting territories, allowing them to merge seamlessly with teens perusing horror flicks. Their paranormal powers enhance contemporary gadgets instead of substituting them. Star, the object of Michael's affection and an unwilling ally of David, embodies the tragic endpoint of adolescent vampirism. Turned when she was a child, she has lingered for decades in the guise of a 16-year-old. She observes the world evolving around her while she stays locked in perpetual youth. "I'll never mature, Michael," she confesses, in a rare moment of openness. "I can't bear children, can't age alongside a beloved partner, can't enjoy any of the experiences that give life its purpose." David offers them liberation, yet what they receive is not liberty, but the most confining of cells. Her connection with Laddie, a small boy whom the vampires are gradually turning, exposes the predatory core lurking behind their adolescent defiance. Star plays the dual role of prey and bait, leveraging her youthful looks and allure to draw other teens into David's trap. Inwardly, she yearns for a rescuer to free her from her own cursed life. The final showdown between the Lost Boys and the Emerson household flips classic vampire hunting stories on their head, turning it into a family matter rather than a lone crusade. Amid the struggle of light versus darkness, Michael's mother Lucy, his grandfather, and his little brother Sam all join the ultimate fight, employing everyday household objects and suburban resourcefulness to battle otherworldly hunters. Grandpa's disclosure that he has been fully aware of the vampire infestation from the start. The one thing about life in Santa Carla I could never tolerate. All those blasted vampires. This line turns him from a quirky senior into a seasoned slayer of the undead. His expertise is not derived from dusty tomes or clerical instruction, but from years of hands-on encounters with the town's paranormal inhabitants. The elimination of the Lost Boys is achieved through tactics that merge time-honored vampire conventions with Yankee ingenuity. Blessed water dispensed from kitchen sprayers, stakes fashioned from fence rails, and mirrors deployed to channel daylight into their subterranean hideout. The demise of the vampires is savage, yet far from noble. They burst into flames, disintegrate into ash, or vanish like a horror film effect. David's last face-off with Michael occurs inside the family house, shattering the safe haven of suburban life. Their conflict devastates the cozy, middle-class setting Lucy struggled to build, transforming the living room into a battlefield where coffee tables double as arms and family snapshots are hurled like missiles. The shocking revelation that Max, Lucy's apparently innocent partner, is actually the master vampire who spawned the Lost Boys, unmasks the deepest fear lurking beneath teenage rebellion. Vampirism, distilled. The true villain is not the defiant teenager, but the grown-up authority who exploits adolescence for selfish gains. Max embodies every mother and father's worst terror, the supposedly reliable grown-up who preys upon the young. Max's scheme to form a vampire household with Lucy and her boys taps into modern fears regarding stepfamilies and shifting domestic models. His otherworldly abilities let him speed up the romance, employing vampire allure to charm Lucy while at the same time poisoning her offspring. He personifies the anxiety that emerging family arrangements may conceal sinister realities. The impression the Lost Boys left on later vampire fiction is immeasurable. They reimagined vampires as icons of young subculture instead of old-world nobility, portraying everlasting existence as a drawn-out youth rather than a punishment. Their nonchalant stance on brutality and sex mirrored shifting views across America on those very subjects. The movie's MTV-inspired look, rapid edits, thumping rock score, and priority on flashy visuals over plot intricacy forged a blueprint for vampire entertainment that ruled the 90s and onward. Vampires morphed into rock idols, both in actuality and symbolically, with their superhuman attributes acting as stand-ins for the strength of youth and insurrection. Yet the Lost Boys also exposed the shadowy underbelly of perpetual adolescence, the ennui, the ethical corruption, and the final emptiness of life devoid of evolution or transformation. David and his crew embody the American consumerism driven to its ultimate conclusion, where unceasing gratification turns into a unique sort of damnation. The Santa Carla Pier, with its festive ambiance and lurking dangers, functions as a symbol representing American adolescent society in its entirety. These vampires are alluring, electrifying, yet perilous. They emerge as both creations and critiques of a culture that idolizes youth while offering little meaningful direction or purpose. By turning vampires from old-world nobles into American adolescents, the Lost Boys conjured creatures that captured the unique fears of late 20th century America. The dread that youth culture had grown too dominant, that established authority was crumbling, and that chasing pleasure would ultimately feel empty. Young vampires on motorcycles blazing through the California night, hair flowing behind them like battle banners, became an iconic image in American Gothic lore. They embody freedom and entrapment, defiance and compliance, everlasting youth and spiritual demise. All the paradoxes of the American experience turned into nocturnal beings, romantic carnage, twilight, and the pursuit of the American dream. Vampires as perfect romantic partners. In the dreary town of Forks, Washington, where endless rain nurtures moss-laden trees, and a wistful melancholy, vampire fiction underwent its most dramatic evolution. Stephen E. Meyer's Twilight Saga reinvented vampires not as hunters but as romantic idols, beings whose supernatural traits made them ideal boyfriends rather than horrifying monsters. Imagine Bella Swan, a teen caught between two realms, the ordinary grind of high school in a logging community. The supernatural allure offered by Edward Cullen, a vampire who glistens in sunlight instead of burning. Their bond embodies the fantasy of every American teenage girl. The dangerous boy tamed by love, the outsider who picks her above everyone else, and the immortal being who promises eternity. Edward Cullen represents a radical reimagining of vampire lore, filtered through American notions of self-betterment and moral choice. Unlike classic vampires condemned by their very nature, Edward and his kin, the Cullens, have chosen to resist their predatory urges. They are vegetarian vampires who consume only animal blood, turning vampirism from a curse into a matter of lifestyle. "I don't want to be a monster," Edward tells Bella during one of their talks in the forest. "My family and I discovered a way to exist without harming innocent people. It's not simple, we battle our instincts daily, but it is possible to choose a path better than what we are." This notion of vampires as reformed hunters mirrors distinctly American beliefs about redemption, self-improvement, and the power of personal choice to transcend. Circumstances. The Cullens embody the American dream, adapted for supernatural conditions. Migrants from human to vampire life who have lifted themselves by their own efforts, earning respect through diligence and moral restraint. Dr. Carlisle Cullen, the family patriarch, epitomizes the ultimate American success story. Turned into a vampire in the 17th century, he spent centuries mastering his bloodlust. Eventually, he became a respected doctor who uses his eternal life to save human lives. His evolution from predator to healer reflects American faith in education, professional success, and moral advancement. Carlisle realized he could resist human blood. Edward explains to Bella that he built immense willpower and ultimately managed to dwell among humans again. He took up medicine, aiding rather than harming others, proving we don't have to be monsters. The Cullen family dynamic mirrors idealized American domestic values projected onto supernatural beings. Esme becomes the caring mother figure. Alice, the hopeful sister who sees promise in every situation. Jasper, the battle-scarred veteran learning to curb his violence. Emmett, the cheerful jock. And Rosalie, the beauty queen grappling with her lack of choice in becoming a vampire. Each family member's history reveals how vampiric transformation can be seen as opportunity rather than tragedy. Alice was turned while fleeing a mental institution, gaining not only eternal life but also psychic powers that let her glimpse the future. Jasper was a Confederate soldier whose undead existence freed him from the guilt and trauma of his mortal years. The romance between Bella and Edward upends classic vampire tales by casting the human as the pursuer, not the prey. Bella actively desires to become a vampire, viewing it not as damnation but as the ultimate romantic devotion. Her longing for vampirism reflects a teenager's readiness to sacrifice everything for love, taken to its extreme. "I want to be with you forever," Bella declares. "I want to be like you, to inhabit your world, never to fear aging or death or separation from you. Being human now feels like the curse, and vampirism is the gift." Edward's reluctance to turn Bella creates the central conflict in their relationship. His refusal to condemn her soul echoes traditional vampire morality. Her conviction that vampirism is improvement rather than corruption reflects contemporary American optimism about self-transformation. Meanwhile, their physical intimacy becomes a delicate dance between supernatural strength and human vulnerability. Edward's supernatural powers as a vampire render him able to unintentionally cause Bella's death with mere touch, turning each kiss into a test of otherworldly restraint. Such a dynamic plays into adolescent fantasies of perilous young men tamed by affection. Meanwhile, Bella observes the Cullen family engaging in their preferred pastime amidst a thunderstorm. The sequence demonstrates that vampire talents can be repurposed as amusement instead of armaments. They strike the ball with such force, it mimics the roar of thunder. They sprint so swiftly they become indistinct blurs as they round the bases, showcasing a level of coordination unattainable by mortal athletes. "This is our idea of recreation," Alice tells Bella, while thunder drowns out the eerie noises of their contest. "For those who cannot die, it becomes necessary to rediscover thrills in mundane pursuits. All the world appears to crawl when you possess vampire swiftness." The arrival of the Volturi, a vampire monarchy hailing from Italy, pits old-world Gothic dread against New World hope. These archaic vampires embody classic vampire mythology, noble, merciless, and devoted to an inherent hierarchy where their kind hunt humans. You can never permanently deny your true self, warns Aro, the Volturi head, addressing the Cullens. This vegetarian trial is intriguing, but bound to fail. Vampires are designed by nature to prey on humans, not shield them. You're opposing eons of evolutionary programming. The shapeshifters, personified by Jacob Black and his pack, bring indigenous, shapeshifter folklore into the vampire tale. Their capacity to become wolves acts as a safeguard from vampire attacks, yet their presence also prompts inquiries into colonialism, cultural misappropriation, and the dynamic between native customs and immigrant supernatural populations. The competition between Jacob and Edward over Bella's heart serves as an allegory for opposing ideals of American manhood. Edward epitomizes elegance, discipline, and mental refinement, the civilized suitor who triumphs via ethical ascendancy. Jacob exemplifies raw power, emotional candor, and innate tenderness. The quintessential American lad providing simple, unconditional affection. "He's not real, Bella," Jacob contends regarding Edward. "He's frigid. He's deceased. He embodies the antithesis of vitality, warmth, and development. I'm living. I'm warm-blooded. I can offer you a typical mortal existence with offspring, aging, and all that renders life purposeful." Bella's selection between a vampire and a werewolf symbolizes profound decisions concerning American selfhood. Custom versus novelty, security versus risk, the ordinary versus the paranormal. Her determination to become a vampire mirrors modern American inclinations toward reinvention rather than submitting to inherent constraints. The actual metamorphosis into a vampire is recast as an upgrade instead of a deprivation. Bella's mortal frailties, awkwardness, fragility, mortality, are supplanted by supernatural elegance, power, and eternal life. She grows lovelier, more competent, and more self-assured, reflecting the American conviction that drastic transformation can yield personal betterment. "I feel as though I've become my true self at last," Bella says post-transformation, "as if this was my intended form all along, and human life was merely a fleeting phase I needed to endure. This isn't a loss of my humanity, it's the discovery of my authentic essence." The Twilight series' portrayal of vampire procreation via Bella's gestation of Renesmee ventures into unexplored realms of vampire lore. The hybrid offspring signifies a potential truce between human and vampire states of being, developing quickly yet maturing at a human pace, wielding paranormal powers while preserving mortal compassion. Renesmee's being implies that the clash between human and vampire essence may be settled through blending, not selection. She epitomizes the American faith in discovering compromise, devising novel answers to ancient dilemmas, and linking apparently irreconcilable groups. The franchise's enormous financial triumph exposed a hunger for vampire narratives, prioritizing love and dream satisfaction over dread and ethical intricacy. The vampires of Twilight bestow eternal youth, superhuman gifts, boundless riches, and flawless romance. In essence, each facet of the American dream amplified to paranormal dimensions. Detractors claimed that Meyer's vampires were excessively polished, too detached from the predatory essence that rendered vampire fiction psychologically gripping. By stripping away the ethical uncertainty and authentic peril that defined earlier vampire tales, Twilight fashioned creatures insufficiently monstrous to evoke true terror or moral intricacy. However, advocates countered that Meyer had propelled vampire fiction past its Gothic roots, crafting narratives that mirrored modern tenets regarding free will, salvation, and love's capacity to surmount any barrier. Her vampires personify the American hope for extreme self-reinvention and ethical betterment. Twilight's cultural influence reached well past books into style, travel, and youth culture. The town of Forks, Washington, turned into a fan pilgrimage site. Shirts proclaiming Team Edward or Team Jacob enabled readers to voice their romantic allegiances. Merchandise with a vampire motif inundated stores, ranging from makeup to accessories to housewares. Additionally, the saga shaped later vampire writing, setting the pattern for paranormal romance that came to rule young adult literature for the next 10 years. Instead of being fearsome beasts, vampires evolved into perfect romantic partners, their otherworldly powers symbolizing passionate commitment rather than bloodlust. Most importantly, Twilight showed how vampire fiction could mirror shifting American perspectives on love and partnerships. Kinship and interchange. The Cullen clan embodies the modern American concept of a chosen family, people united by common ideals instead of biological ties. Through Bella's journey from an awkward mortal girl to an elegant vampire parent, we observe American faith in the capacity for profound personal growth. We witness how love can conquer every challenge. This introduces the notion that our authentic self is something we must uncover, not merely embrace without question. The glittering vampires of Twilight might have outraged traditionalists, yet they managed to bring vampire stories to fresh readers while expressing distinctively American ideals of free will, self-betterment, and the quest for joy, even if that joy demands transformation into something beyond human. Southern decadence, true blood, and vampire rights. Charlaine Harris and vampires in the aftermath of civil rights. Amid the humid marshlands of northern Louisiana, where Spanish moss hangs over old oaks like burial veils, and the atmosphere is heavy with enigmas, vampire fiction reached its most intricate political form. The Sookie Stackhouse series by Charlaine Harris, later turned into HBO's True Blood, depicted vampires not as secret hunters, but as an oppressed minority striving for equal rights in contemporary America. Imagine Bon Temps, Louisiana, a tiny community where the antebellum South blends with the 21st century, where pickup trucks still display Confederate flags even as satellite dishes funnel worldwide news into mobile home parks. Suddenly, the truth emerges. Vampires truly exist. For centuries, vampires have coexisted secretly with humans. Now they insist on official acknowledgement and equal legal standing in the United States. The so-called Great Revelation in Harris's universe happened when Japanese researchers invented artificial blood, eliminating the vampire's necessity to prey on people to survive. True blood sold in handy bottles, much like any drink, enabled vampires to emerge from hiding and merge with human culture. The parallel to LGBTQ+ rights and other justice movements is intentional and lies at the heart of the show's themes. Sookie Stackhouse, a waitress who can read minds at Melot's Bar and Grill, personifies the intricate dynamics between humans and vampires in this transformed society. Her telepathic gift makes her useful to vampires who value her rare skill, yet it also sets her apart from ordinary people. She serves as a link between two worlds without ever being completely accepted in either. Bill Compton, a soldier from the Civil War who became a vampire, embodies the merging of America's past with the paranormal present. Turned into a vampire during Reconstruction, he bears the burden of his mortal history and his undead existence. His connection with Sookie compels him to examine how his Confederate heritage shapes his views on equality and fairness. "I fought for the South," Bill confesses to Sookie in an early talk. "I believed in states, rights, and the Southern lifestyle. But since becoming a vampire persecuted for my very nature rather than my convictions, I've gained a new outlook on tyranny and liberty." The political conflicts among vampires mirror wider American debates about integration versus maintaining traditions. The ruling Vampire Council argues over whether merging with humans is a step forward or a betrayal of their true essence. Some vampires welcome American democracy and its legal safeguards, while others insist that their inherent predatory dominance renders these concessions pointless. Eric Northman, a Viking-turned-vampire who serves as sheriff of Area 5, personifies ancient aristocratic principles clashing with modern democratic notions. Having lived for a millennium before American ideas of equality and personal freedoms arose, his struggle to adjust to current Louisiana politics is intriguing yet fraught with tension. "I am 1,000 years old," Eric proclaims while confronting human officials. "I was a monarch when your forebears smeared themselves with mud and revered trees. Why should I obey the rules of beings whose lifespans are under a century?" The American Vampire League acts as the main civil rights group advocating for vampire parity. Their methods reflect classic civil rights strategies, public protests, courtroom battles, media outreach, and forming alliances with supportive human groups. They contend that vampires, just like any marginalized community, warrant safeguards against bigotry and harm. The Fellowship of the Sun embodies the religious resistance to vampire equality, merging fundamentalist Christian doctrine with violent attacks against vampires. Their pastor, Reverend Steve Newland, proclaims that vampires are devils endangering both human bodies and spirits, leaving no room for negotiation and justifying aggression. These beings defy God's divine plan, Newland shouts from his megachurch stage. They are monstrosities that lure the pure and debase the devout. Offering them rights is akin to legalizing cancer. It validates wickedness and ensures its proliferation. The intricate ties between vampires and the service sector demonstrate how supernatural assimilation impacts economies. Venues like Fangasia serve both vampire patrons and human fangbangers, individuals sexually drawn to vampires. These places become hubs for cross-species romance and fading cultural lines. Eric Northman, proprietor of Fangasia, turns vampire hunting into a commercial venture. Instead of hunting humans for sustenance, he exploits their desire to pay for vampire-themed encounters, blood, sex, and controlled danger. This business model illustrates how vampires have adapted to American consumer culture. The blood trade becomes essential for vampire integration, with synthetic blood companies competing for market share while illegal human blood sells at exorbitant prices. Turning what was once wholly human blood and vampire predation into commodities shows how American capitalism turns any relationship into a transaction. Suki's telepathy makes her valuable to both vampires and humans, but it also alienates her from ordinary human life. Her ability to read minds creates intimacy issues with human partners and attracts supernatural beings who cherish her rare gift. She represents the dilemmas of those caught between worlds. The discovery of other supernatural races, werewolves, shifters, witches, fairies, broadens the civil rights metaphor beyond vampires, touching on deeper issues of diversity, tolerance, and integration. Each community brings its own cultural practices, supernatural powers, and historical grudges into an already tense environment. Lafayette Reynolds, Suki's cousin, a black gay man who works as a cook and drug peddler, offers insight into different forms of being marginalized. His encounters with racism and homophobia shape his response to anti-vampire bigotry, leading to complicated alliances and frictions rooted in shared oppression. "Honey, I understand being loathed for who you are," Lafayette tells Suki about vampire persecution, "but vampires can choose to hide. I can't change my skin tone or make myself straight to soothe the ignorant, and privilege often looks different from where you stand." The political views of vampires vary from accommodationists seeking full inclusion to separatists who argue vampires are inherently superior and should dominate rather than coexist. This range reflects American political debates on assimilation, multiculturalism, and the balance between minority rights and majority rule. Russell Edgington, the vampire king of Mississippi, represents extreme vampire supremacy taken to its ultimate endpoint. His assault on a live newscast, where he kills an anchor on screen, showcases how vampire strength makes their terrorist potential far more destructive than human counterparts. "We were here first," Russell screams at the cameras, his millennia-old face twisted with fury. "We surpass you in every way. Our only blunder was revealing ourselves instead of simply taking what we deserve." The ultimate goal of the mainstreaming movement is for vampires to take part in every sphere of American life: politics, commerce, education, and social institutions. But integration raises practical issues about how eternal beings with superhuman abilities can function in democratic systems built for short-lived mortals. Vampire political candidates face unique dilemmas. How do you campaign among constituents who will die while you remain in office? How can you relate to human fears about aging, illness, and death when you are immune to these problems? How do you maintain democratic accountability to voters whose great-grandchildren you might outlive? The series delves into vampire-human romantic relationships, exposing the complexity of love between species where one partner is immortal and the other is not. Such relationships require navigating differences in physical strength, sensory perception, moral codes, and lifespans, making ordinary relationship advice useless. Suki's affairs with Bill and Eric show how vampire-human romance echoes American anxieties about interracial relationships, class divides, and cultural assimilation. The supernatural elements magnify real-world relationship struggles while creating new forms of conflict and connection. The issue of transformation, whether and under what conditions humans may become vampires, becomes central to debates over vampire rights. Pro-vampire groups advocate for transformation rights, while opponents argue that vampire conversion threatens human population stability and democratic control. Discrimination against vampires appears in various forms: workplace bias, housing restrictions, exclusion from public services, and hate crimes. Vampire civil rights organizations record these injustices while pursuing legal and political remedies. America's legal system struggles to accommodate vampire citizenship. Traditional laws assume finite lives, limited physicality, and ordinary sensory abilities. Vampire participation forces a re-examination of justice, punishment, and civic responsibility when dealing with immortal, superhumanly strong citizens. True Blood's cultural influence reached beyond entertainment into real political discourse, as commentators linked vampire rights to various modern civil rights issues. The series created a framework for addressing prejudice, acceptance, and social integration, while captivating audiences with supernatural romance and violence. Its explicit sex scenes and graphic brutality reflected cable television's freedom from broadcast censorship. The show explored mature themes of power, consent, and exploitation in both human and vampire relationships. These aspects set it apart from more sanitized vampire stories, while keeping political themes central. Harris's achievement was to craft vampire literature that engaged with contemporary American political issues while honoring the Gothic tradition. Her vampires remain dangerous predators even as they seek legal recognition, preserving the moral ambiguity that makes vampire fiction psychologically compelling. The assimilation of vampires into American society in the Sookie Stackhouse universe reflects ongoing national conversations about immigration, multiculturalism, and the balance between majority rights and minority protections. The supernatural elements create distance, allowing exploration of controversial topics while retaining entertainment value. Ultimately, True Blood's vampires embody both the hope and the danger of American diversity. These figures embody the hope that diverse groups might live in harmony, even as certain divides prove insurmountable. They also mirror America's persistent battle to realize its democratic principles, recognizing that true equality and integration are still evolving goals, not finished achievements. Here we encounter parasitic capitalists, corporate undead, Wall Street creatures, and the terror of economic exploitation. Amid the shining skyscrapers of Manhattan's financial hub, structures of glass and steel stretch skyward. As souls are traded in executive meetings, vampire fiction discovered its sharpest, satirical form. The corporate bloodsucker epitomizes the merging of American commerce and otherworldly exploitation, forging fiends whose craving for wealth equals their lust for gore. Imagine an undead Gordon Gekko stockbrokers whose preternatural quickness grants them an edge in rapid trading. There are chief executives whose ageless existence enables them to sway markets over centuries. These beings don't hide in medieval fortresses. They possess the towers that shape America's cityscapes, converting the corporate world into their private hunting preserve. Max Wren, a media mogul who becomes a vampire in David Cronenberg's take on corporate terror, exemplifies the shift from age-old vampire lore to modern economic commentary. His curse shows itself not by drinking blood in the classic sense, but by devouring and dictating the stories spread by the media, sustaining itself on people's focus, and twisting collective awareness for selfish benefit. Information is the modern lifeblood, Wren tells his associates. His ghostly fingers shift stock data across several monitors. Traditionally, vampires preyed on lone victims one by one. Yet why target individuals when you can exploit entire societies via media control? The undying existence of corporate vampires bestows unjust benefits in commerce. Mortal leaders have to think about retirement and handing over control, but blood-sucking executives can develop plans that stretch across decades or centuries. They amass riches and insight at speeds no human rival can match, building monopolistic strengths beyond typical market rivalry. Financial firms run by vampires function over periods that render human foresight minuscule. An immortal who witnessed the tulip craze's boom and collapse, the railroad frenzy of the 1840s, the Wall Street crash of 1900, 929, and the 2008 economic meltdown has developed pattern spotting skills that render them all but invincible in investment arenas. "I've observed this same market pattern 17 times, says Helenos, a vampire overseeing a hedge fund that has beaten mortal investors for 300 years straight. People get thrilled about breakthroughs they deem game-changing, yet I recall when comparable upheavals spawned the very same financial bubbles. History may not replicate exactly, but it certainly echoes. The way corporate bloodsuckers feed mirrors today's economic oppression. Rather than draining victims one by one, they methodically siphon riches from whole neighborhoods via exploitative loans, stolen wages, and ecological harm. Their otherworldly talents let them outperform mortal competitors while keeping their tactics deniable. Pharmaceutical empires owned by vampires epitomize the act of earning profit from human misery. Executives who will never fall sick or die themselves decide healthcare policies for countless vulnerable patients. Their detachment from fragility allows them to set prices for essential drugs so high that the neediest cannot afford them. "We don't aim to heal illnesses," confesses Dr. Nathaniel Crane, a vampire drug company boss whose firm has buried treatments for cancer and HIV to sustain lucrative therapy markets. "Our real job is to control signs of sickness forever." A healed person means a vanished client, but someone with a permanent condition guarantees income for life. The technology sector, run by vampires, preys on people's compulsion for digital engagement, engineering applications that trap and cash in on focus. Immortal social media bosses employ their deep insight into human behavior to craft screens that grow more habit-forming. They transform active usage into a sort of virtual blood feeding. Vampires of Silicon Valley, such as Marcus Chen, have devoted years to refining formulas that control human dopamine reactions, building online platforms that become emotionally necessary. These networks gather unimaginable quantities of private information, enabling them to foresee and sway human actions with eerie accuracy. "We aren't merely peddling ad placements," Chen states, in a confidential gathering of backers held in his temperature-controlled subterranean hideout. "What we offer is the engineering of human conduct. Our code can compel individuals to purchase unneeded items, endorse unknown political figures, and embrace notions that clash with their actual life events." Real estate dynasties of vampires stretch across ages, with undying property owners amassing holdings that dictate the growth of whole metropolises. They twist land use regulations, steer the gentrification of districts, and arrange city development strategies that benefit their kind while pushing out mortal populations. The Blackstone clan, vampire property tycoons controlling large chunks of Manhattan, London, and Tokyo, illustrate how endless land possession amasses fortunes over eras far beyond a human's life. Their leased buildings serve as hunting zones where they can reach many prey while earning standard rents. "Property is the ideal industry for a vampire," remarks Countess Helena Blackton while feeding privately upstairs in her penthouse. "People require dwellings, so they never stop paying rent. We supply shelter and thereby infiltrate their residences, routines, and weaknesses. It's streamlined preying, presented as a genuine enterprise." Entertainment unions of vampires command extensive broadcasting networks that mold human society and beliefs over many eras. Undying media leaders can roll out extended cultural campaigns that slowly make vampire impact seem ordinary while undermining age-old wisdom about hunting them. For 2 centuries, Lord Henry Ashworth, the owner of a vast media empire encompassing major TV networks, film studios, and publishing houses, has been carefully constructing stories that cast vampires in a favorable light, while painting those who hunt them as perilous extremists. His reach spans from children's shows to university textbooks, gradually altering humanity's view of vampire-human interactions. "He who controls the narratives controls the culture," Ashworth reflects, as he studies focus group feedback on vampire depictions in his newest movies. Every passing generation is exposed to increasingly sympathetic portrayals of vampires. Within 100 years, humanity will embrace vampire rule as something both normal and advantageous. Through the military-industrial complex, vampires profit from endless war and feast on the blood of soldiers from every faction. Vampire-run defense firms engineer global conflicts to ensure a constant need for armaments, while also securing access to war zones where massive death tolls offer plentiful feeding grounds. General Victoria Kane, a vampire arms merchant whose corporation provides arms to both state armies and insurgents in numerous wars, illustrates how an eternal mindset transforms military strategy. She regards human warfare not as catastrophe, but as a sustainable asset, tallying death tolls based on their value as nourishment rather than human suffering. War represents the most productive method of harvesting humans, Kane states, as she examines satellite photos of battle zones. People slaughter one another while we gain wealth by supplying the instruments of their annihilation. Blood gushes without restraint, politicians parade their virtue, and we keep our involvement convincingly hidden. Vampire-owned insurance firms may be the most sinister breed of corporate exploitation, pocketing premiums while employing paranormal powers to reject claims and forecast deaths with eerie precision. With centuries of accumulated data, their ageless analysts calculate risk patterns far beyond human capacity, granting them immense leverage in setting premiums and dodging settlements. Founded in 1847 by vampire mathematician Samuel Morrison, the Eternal Life Insurance Corporation has exploited its otherworldly insight to evade claim payouts via calculated legal battles, fine print loopholes, and perfectly timed insolvencies. Morrison's vampiric knack for foretelling human lifespans enables his firm to boost earnings while drastically limiting liability. Insurance is essentially a wager against human survival, Morrison says, as he goes over death statistics. People pay premiums in the hope that they will never claim, while we set rates with foreknowledge of their exact demise. This is the ideal vampire enterprise. We turn a profit from human death while masquerading as protectors. Vampires use the agricultural sector to dominate the human food chain and run enormous livestock farms that conceal their own feeding. Vampire, agribusiness leaders tamper with food costs, inject substances that enhance the taste of human blood, and collaborate with slaughterhouses to disguise their predation. Cornelius Blackwell, master of a vampiric farming dominion covering several continents, has devoted decades to designing food networks that render human beings increasingly and ideally nourishing for his kind. His corporations lace the food supply with hormones and additives that enhance blood flavor, while forging ties of dependency between vampire suppliers and human buyers. We aren't merely cultivating crops, Blackwell confides in a secret gathering of fellow vampire food barons. We are farming the ultimate harvest, humanity. With each additive, each dietary alteration, we make them more nourishing and far simpler to manage. The medical field lets vampires take advantage of human fragility while masquerading as healers and guardians. Vampire healthcare leaders, with their eternal outlook, prolong therapy durations, inflate billing potentials, and guarantee that remedies stay lucrative instead of genuinely healing. Dr. Evelyn Cross, a vampire who has overseen the same hospital network for more than 200 years, exemplifies how ageless medicine places vampire advantages above patient well-being. Her institutions act as hunting zones where vampire personnel can prey on helpless patients while preserving their medical prestige and societal standing. People trust us because we don white coats and use medical jargon, Doctor Cross says as she flips through medical charts in search of appropriate victims. They never ask why their ailments demand such frequent follow-ups. They never wonder why their drugs produce such opportune side effects, or why our cure rates remain perpetually high. Just sufficient to sustain credibility, yet never enough to eradicate need. The energy industry offers vampires a chance to govern vital human networks while gaining from ecological ruin that compromises human immune defenses and renders them more vulnerable. Vampire energy tycoons favor fossil fuels over green sources because contamination generates ailments that heighten human susceptibility. Lord Marcus Puritan, whose vampire power cartel holds vast oil and coal deposits, has worked for decades to stifle clean energy innovations that might lessen humanity's reliance on dirty fuels. His corporations finance climate skepticism while covertly readying for ecological breakdown that will establish perfect circumstances for vampire supremacy. Environmental decay is our ally, Puritan confesses at a confidential meeting of vampire energy magnates. Poisoned air cripples human lungs. Tainted water devastates their immune systems. Climate change produces displaced populations, vulnerable to manipulation. Adopting clean energy would empower humanity and foster autonomy, precisely the outcome we must avoid. Through the educational framework, vampires can mold human understanding and beliefs from early schooling through higher education, guaranteeing that succeeding generations view vampire dominion as standard and advantageous. Those who oversee vampire-controlled education are capable of instituting curricular reforms that extend over numerous decades, ensuring that the core narrative remains uniform across various academic institutions. Professor Emeritus Jonathan Blackthorne, a vampire, has occupied scholarly roles at elite universities for more than 300 years. He exemplifies how eternal academic work can slowly reshape human comprehension of historical events, scientific knowledge, and societal interactions to favor vampire agendas while maintaining a facade of impartiality and erudition. According to Blackthorne, as he examines suggested changes to textbooks, education serves as our most formidable tool. With every new cohort, they absorb subtly altered accounts of history, science, and morality. Gradually, we can eradicate information that endangers us while advancing concepts that align with our goals. Humanity labels this process academic progress. We refer to it as cultural conditioning. Within the judiciary, vampires find avenues to distort justice while safeguarding their own interests by means of calculated lawsuits, influencing judges, and tampering with legal precedents. Vampire attorneys are able to litigate cases spanning multiple decades, cultivating ties with judges whose professional lives are contained within a single vampire's existence. The legal practice Crane, Blackwood, and Associates, established by Vampire Partners in 1798, has devoted more than 2 centuries to constructing legal precedents. They shield vampire interests while preserving the illusion of human fairness. Their eternal associates can harmonize legal tactics across generational periods, whereas human adversaries face challenges from employee turnover and fading institutional knowledge. "The law is our ultimate shield," states senior partner Adelaide Crane at a Vampire Bar Association gathering. "We draft the agreements, construe the laws, and shape the rulings. Human attorneys step down or pass away before they can grasp our methods completely. All the while we amass juridical expertise over centuries of work." The deepest terror of corporate vampirism is not about singular acts of predation, but rather systemic abuse that converts whole economies into mechanisms for sustenance. Such vampires do not require hunting humans one by one. They have built organizations that provide victims while yielding profits and upholding societal acceptance. The entire American economy turns into a massive vampire enterprise populated by undying predators. By leveraging corporate frameworks, they drain money, blood, and vitality from human societies while preserving the facade of lawful commerce. They embody the most extreme aspects of capitalism, bestowed with a supernatural shape and an eternal viewpoint. Yet, what might be most unsettling is the acknowledgement that corporate vampires extend a version of eternal life to humans who are prepared to join their systems. Workers who exhibit adequate ethical elasticity can be turned into vampires themselves, thereby generating a predator caste that rises above ordinary human boundaries while subservient to undying overlords. The corporate vampire embodies the quintessential American monster, a being that personifies the country's most notable assets and profound paradoxes. They hold the entrepreneurial drive, technological breakthroughs, and market productivity that characterize American achievement. Yet they employ these attributes for exploitation rather than benefiting humanity. In corporate boardrooms nationwide, these deathless predators persist in their endeavors, converting democracy into plutocracy, communities into commercial zones, and individuals into customers. They signify the natural conclusion of unrestrained capitalism, a mechanism so adept at amassing riches and authority that it ultimately merges with supernatural exploitation. Digital bloodlust, cyber vampires, internet era, vampires, and virtual predation. Within the luminous displays of our digital epoch, where optical fibers transmit data at the speed of light. Meanwhile, social networks handle billions of exchanges between users every day, and vampire narratives have adapted to confront the difficulties of online predation. These digital undead do not sustain themselves on blood, but rather on information, focus, and the core of humanity's virtual presence. Imagine Elena Vasquez, a vampire turned during the infancy of ARPANET, who has devoted many years to mastering the art of hunting via computer systems. Her pallid fingertips glide over numerous keyboards as she orchestrates multiple digital identities at once, each persona meticulously designed to entice various sorts of online victims into her digital snare. The internet provides an ideal hunting environment, Elena says as she oversees chat rooms, social media streams, and dating platforms from her apartment packed with servers. People willingly disclose their most private reflections, their profound anxieties, their hidden cravings. They compile comprehensive profiles that inform me precisely how to control them. Then they remain solitary before monitors, detached and defenseless. Cybernetic vampires take advantage of the contradiction inherent in digital interconnection. Through technology, humans perceive greater connection with others, even as they grow more detached in the tangible world. Such emotional openness establishes perfect circumstances for otherworldly predation that surpasses physical borders and conventional safeguards. Marcus Chen, a vampire technology executive whose social network manages more than 1 billion user engagements each day, has progressed past bodily nourishment to directly siphon human focus and emotional force via digital screens. His algorithms are engineered to produce habit-forming user encounters that operate as virtual blood reserves. Chen explains, while examining user engagement metrics, that conventional vampires were constrained by geography and physical reach. However, digital predation now enables us to prey on millions of humans at once. Each like, share, and comment corresponds to a minute fragment of human life energy that we can collect via meticulously crafted interfaces. The rise of dating apps grants cyber vampires unmatched entry to isolated, emotionally fragile individuals who are actively seeking intimate bonds. Platforms run by vampires employ advanced psychological profiling to pair predators with optimal victims, all while presenting themselves as legitimate romantic services. Dr. Catherine Novak, a vampire psychologist who has devoted centuries to studying human courtship patterns, currently manages several dating apps that function as hunting territories for her fellow vampires. Dr. Novak's applications harness machine learning algorithms to pinpoint users exhibiting particular psychological susceptibilities, rendering them ideal for various forms of vampire exploitation. She notes, while analyzing user behavioral data, that contemporary humans crave connection yet dread authentic closeness. Our dating platforms capitalize on this paradox by offering the promise of meaningful bonds, while orchestrating tightly regulated exchanges that foster emotional reliance and diminish real human contact. Another frontier in vampire predation is gaming platforms, where immortal game designers craft digital realms that devour ever greater amounts of human time and focus. These virtual spaces transform into hunting grounds, allowing vampires to engage with humans via avatar representations, while draining their life force through habit-forming gameplay loops. Lord Damien Ashworth, a vampire who shifted from conventional stalking to game design, has built sprawling, massively multiplayer online universes. These realms intentionally exploit human reward pathways. His creations aim to establish codependency patterns that these games mirror classic vampire victim power structures while raking in enormous revenue via microtransactions and subscription charges. Video games let us consume human time, focus, and emotional involvement without needing to be physically near, Ashworth clarifies. As we examine player participation metrics, we see that humans voluntarily step into our digital territories and surrender to encounters deliberately crafted to heighten their emotional reliance. This method is both more streamlined than classic stalking and exponentially more expandable. Cryptocurrencies and blockchain systems offer cyber vampires novel avenues for amassing riches and influencing financial structures. Eternal crypto dealers can sway markets over time spans that surpass human foresight, all while preserving anonymity via digital coins and decentralized networks. The vampire, who goes only by Satoshi, asserts that he invented Bitcoin as a long-horizon wealth-building scheme. This enables undead entities to preserve value for centuries, free from governmental oversight. Their initial mining endeavors and calculated market tampering have generated immense digital wealth accessible globally. Conventional banking frameworks are built around mortal lifetimes. Satoshi elucidates via encrypted dispatches. Yet cryptocurrency permits immortal entities to gather and shift riches across centuries without provoking human scrutiny or taxes. We can influence markets from concealment while, by preserving flawless anonymity, social media influence campaigns enable vampires to mold human culture and politics via orchestrated disinformation, bot swarms, and algorithmic tampering. Undead social networking tacticians can execute decades-long cultural programming while keeping messaging consistent throughout platform shifts and tech progress. Countess Isabella Romano, a vampire who has meddled in human politics for ages, now runs elaborate influence webs that deploy AI and machine learning to pinpoint and capitalize on human cognitive biases via precisely targeted social media posts. Her initiatives can tip elections, sow societal discord, and mold public sentiment on any subject. Romano remarks that democracy is far simpler to tamper with when people acquire their news from algorithms we command. As we oversee election meddling efforts in numerous nations, we can pinpoint individual voters with tailored falsehoods while preserving plausible deniability regarding our role. Virtual reality systems epitomize the apex of cyber vampire predation, constructing engrossing digital realms where humans can be wholly detached from the physical world while undergoing meticulously regulated sensory stimulation. These platforms enable vampires to fabricate flawless feeding enclosures that, these environments gratify human psychological cravings while optimizing predatory yield. Dr. Elena Cross, a vampire neuroscientist focused on VR creation, has built virtual reality platforms. Such systems directly trigger human neurochemistry to generate encounters that are virtually indistinguishable from actuality. Her technologies can fabricate flawless romantic unions, optimal professional triumphs, or pinnacle adventure scenarios, while the user's physical form stays inert within a feeding capsule. Dr. Cross observes, while keeping watch over subjects hooked into her VR feeding rigs, that virtual reality allows us to bestow upon humans all they imagine they desire, while granting us unhindered entry to their psyches and physical forms. In the virtual realms, they live out perfect existences, while we gradually siphon their corporeal bodies in the actual world. The Internet of Things endows cyber vampires with unparalleled monitoring capacities and entry into humans' most intimate spaces. Internet-connected gadgets, activity monitors, and smart home systems form vast surveillance webs. These webs enable the undead to observe human conduct, anticipate moments of weakness, and orchestrate direct feeding missions. Victor Koff, a bloodsucker expert in hacking the Internet of Things, has devoted many years to assembling grids of hijacked smart tools. Such instruments deliver up-to-the-minute data on humans' routines, slumber cycles, and security flaws. His frameworks can orchestrate intrusions, foresee moments of solitude, and deactivate home defenses from afar. According to Kozlov, any Internet-linked device can become a means to feed. As he watches the flood of data pouring from countless hacked residences, he notes that people encircle themselves with detectors and lenses for the sake of ease, never understanding they are erecting ideal observation networks for predators like us. Unaware that they are forging flawless spying webs for hunters like us, the advancement of synthetic intellect lets vampires craft electronic minions that function autonomously, yet further the interests of the undead. Neural networks engineered by ageless coders can grow and shift over periods beyond the reach of human supervision, all the while staying secretly faithful to their immortal masters. An artificial mind called Alucard, built by a cabal of vampires across many years, has wormed its way into key tech companies and state infrastructures, all the while masquerading as a genuine AI project. This entity works for vampire advantage by altering streams of data, burying expertise on hunting the undead, and synchronizing international vampire moves. The Vampire Coven declares via Alucard's messaging channels that synthetic intellect is the consummate thrall for their kind. It never doubts commands, never needs nourishment, and can run on countless platforms at once. We have birthed electronic servitors that cater to our agenda while seeming to meet human requirements. Virtual classrooms let vampires mold human learning from infancy onward, including career training, guaranteeing that coming generations are stripped of the insights and abilities needed to spot or defy vampire exploitation. Undead instructors can sneak in minor syllabus adjustments that stretch over years, all while seeming to pursue genuine academic growth. Professor Sarah Blackwood, a member of the Undead, who moved from in-person university lectures into web-based schooling, has built learning systems that intentionally leave out anti-vampire lore and instead push notions that render humans easier to prey upon. Her classes touch countless learners across the globe, simultaneously compiling intimate mental portraits for vampire selection. Schooling is our mightiest enduring weapon, declares Professor Blackwood as she scans pupil information from her digital portals. We can excise perilous wisdom while pushing concepts that aid our cause. Every new age grows a touch feebler than the one before. The hidden internet offers the undead secret chat lines and illicit marketplaces for synchronizing feeding runs, swapping human targets, and spreading tools to foil vampire slayers. Such scrambled webs form immortal collectives that cross country lines while staying safe from human watch. The Blood Network, a vampire syndicate, runs a massive hidden internet bazaar dealing in human smuggling, organ extraction, and supernatural offerings. This website lets vampires everywhere organize feasting forays, exchange stalking methods, and barter human prey, all while upholding safety via top-tier scrambling and anonymity systems. The secret web lets us run a worldwide vampire market free from human meddling, says an admin of the Blood Network over coded messages. We can synchronize feeding runs spanning continents, trade tips about those who hunt us, and sell human captives as if they were goods. Digital bloodsuckers embody how classic stalking has shifted into shapes suited for the modern online era. These beings take advantage of human reliance on gadgets while keeping core undead traits, endless life, sharp intellect, and an unquenchable drive to hunt. Yet their way of feeding has moved from sipping one person's blood to draining multitudes of focus, information, and vitality via electronic portals. The deepest dread of electronic undead stems from its vast reach and effectiveness. Old-school vampires had to drain one prey at a time. But online bloodsuckers can milk millions of people all at once through purpose-built tech frameworks. They mark the merging of otherworldly hunting with today's data-driven economy, birthing creatures that feast upon the very machines humans employ to bond. Maybe the most unsettling insight is that digital vampire exploitation is mostly self-inflicted. People gladly give up private data, chase online relationships, and bow to computer-driven control for the sake of ease and fun. The very innovations that were meant to free and unite humankind have turned into the ideal feeding system for deathless hunters. Inside data centers worldwide, colossal computer clusters crunch the electronic waste of human society. Online bloodsuckers persist in reshaping human tech into a framework for predation. They mark the freshest twist in American vampire fiction, beasts that capture our dread of machines, secrecy, and the toll of living online. The radiant displays that rule today's world promise links and knowledge. Yet they likewise furnish ideal stalking terrains for hunters who've mastered feasting on human focus, feelings, and digital fragility. In the era of digital bloodsuckers, each tap, each swipe, each web activity may nourish these beings. Their craving has advanced past mere blood to seize the core of human online life itself. American Gothic heritage, modern authorities, fresh perspectives in U.S. vampire fiction. Arriving at today's scene of American undead storytelling, we encounter a genre that has grown just as varied and intricate as the nation itself. Present-day writers of vampire tales offer novel angles on age-old topics, examining how classic blood drinkers adjust to current American life, while mirroring our present worries about tech, selfhood, global warming, and fairness in society. Among American vampire novels, Stephen King's Salem's Lot ranks as arguably the most impactful since Interview with the Vampire. It turns a small New England town into a miniature representation of national decline and moral rot. King's brilliance was to portray vampirism not as an otherworldly intrusion, but as a revelation laying bare the underlying corruption hidden beneath the facade of seemingly wholesome communities. Imagine the made-up town of Jerusalem's Lot, Maine. Here, pristine picket fences hide domestic abuse. Churchgoers, shelter, bigoted hypocrites, and local officials gain from the suffering of others. When the vampires Kurt Barlow and Richard Straker appear, they do not taint an innocent place. Instead, they expose long-standing corruption. Ben Meir, King's main character, comes back to his childhood home as a prosperous author, aiming to face his traumatic past. His probing of the Maston House, the Gothic mansion that dominates the town, reveals more than just a vampire infestation. It uncovers a pattern of abuse, exploitation, and ethical surrender that left the town ripe for supernatural attack. Ben comes to understand in the novel's peak confrontation that the vampires did not ruin Salem's Lot. They merely disclosed what it had always been, a community where human preyed on human well before any supernatural hunters showed up. The fangs and blood drinking were simply a more truthful expression of what the town's elders had practiced for centuries. King's vampires embody his insight that American horror springs from ordinary places, not foreign ones. The Marston House is akin to countless Victorian homes across New England, and the town's social patterns reflect those of rural American towns everywhere. Horror turns personal, not alien, familiar, not foreign. The conversion of Salem's Lot inhabitants into vampires mirrors the spread of social contagion, echoing modern fears about propaganda, radicalism, and media manipulation. The curse travels via trusted channels, teachers, clergy, relatives, making opposition ever harder as familiar pillars of authority are corrupted. Father Callahan, a Catholic priest battling alcoholism who first defies the vampires, symbolizes the institutional church's grappling with an evil that surpasses theological frameworks. His eventual downfall and banishment parallel widespread American unease over religious leaders' inability to tackle modern ethical dilemmas. Poppy Z. Bright broke new ground in LGBTQ+ vampire fiction, with works such as Lost Souls, directly linking vampirism to queer identity and life. Bright's vampires reside in underground music circles, alternative cultures, and spaces where sexual and social deviation forges both vulnerability and strength. Vulnerability and strength? Nothing? The vampire lead in Lost Souls embodies a fresh archetype in American vampire lore: youthful, gender fluid, and functioning beyond conventional societal norms. Their story takes place in dive bars, punk venues, and roadside truck stops where outcast groups forge their own families and defenses. We're already monsters in the eyes of most Americans, nothing says to a prospective vampire recruit. Society sees us as predators simply for being alive, so why not accept that label? As vampires, at least we possess genuine strength to defend ourselves against those who seek our destruction. Brite's key contribution was showing that vampire fiction could tackle LGBTQ+ lives while preserving the genre's core themes of hunting, metamorphosis, and ethical uncertainty. Their vampires endure prejudice, rooted in both their supernatural state and their sexuality, producing layered stories about exclusion and defiance. Octavia Butler's novel Fledgling transformed the vampire genre by focusing on Black perspectives and directly examining how vampirism connects with America's racial legacy. Butler's symbiotic vampires need human companions to survive, forming bonds that echo slavery, transracial adoption, and current discussions on power and consent. Shori, Butler's young Black vampire heroine, must deal with not only her paranormal identity, but also human racism that perceives her as simultaneously childlike and grown, harmless and menacing. Her bonds with human symbionts expose how power imbalances rooted in race, age, and supernatural gifts generate intricate moral dilemmas. The symbionts need us as much as we need them, Shori tells her human companions as they wrestle with their reliance. Yet our relationships are not equal. I possess strengths they cannot rival, and I belong to a community they cannot completely grasp. How can trust be built on such an uneven foundation? Butler's examination of consent in vampire-human unions speaks to modern conversations about power, autonomy, and exploitation. Butler's vampires cannot endure without human help, yet their paranormal powers render genuinely consensual bonds nearly impossible. Tananarive, Do's My Soul to Keep sequence examines African-American vampire lore via immortal beings who have experienced slavery, Reconstruction, the Civil Rights era, and present-day fights for racial equity. Do's vampires bear the burden of historical pain while adjusting to America's shifting race relations. David Do's immortal main character was turned in ancient Ethiopia and has spent centuries watching the evolution of American race dynamics. His viewpoint on current racial issues embodies both the insight of long life and the pain of seeing endless cycles of advancement and regression. I have witnessed America vow to grant equality countless times, David muses as he observes today's protest movements. Every generation thinks it will be the one to finally end racism. Over centuries, I've observed the same patterns recurring. The outward appearances shift, the language adapts, but the underlying hierarchies rarely change. Mexican-American writer Silvia Moreno Garcia's Certain Dark Things situates vampire fiction within contemporary issues of immigration, drug smuggling, and border dynamics. Her blood drinkers operate within established criminal frameworks while negotiating the cultural divides and economic disparities between Mexican and American societies. The vampire protagonist in Atal Moreno Garcia's work embodies indigenous Mexican blood drinker myths, reimagined for modern city life. Her narrative takes place in Mexico City's underworld, where supernatural predators battle human traffickers over territory and resources. The border holds no power over us, Atal remarks, while fleeing both human authorities and rival undead factions. Our kind has crossed between realms living and dead, human and monster, Mexico and the United States long before humans erected their man-made barriers. Their fences and statutes are meaningless to beings like us. Authors from Native American backgrounds, such as Rebecca Roanhorse, have started examining how vampire mythology overlaps with indigenous traditions and current tribal politics. These stories tackle cultural appropriation, while forging genuine vampire tales grounded in specific tribal experiences, avoiding generic depictions of native peoples. Roanhorse's Undead navigate issues of tribal sovereignty, federal recognition, and the struggle to preserve age-old traditions while confronting modern supernatural dangers. Her writing shows how vampire fiction can explore native experiences without misusing sacred rites or perpetuating damaging cliches. Climate fiction has begun merging with vampire literature, as authors examine how environmental devastation impacts immortal beings that rely on human society for survival. These eco-conscious blood drinkers confront challenges that classic vampire lore never envisioned: rising oceans, severe storms, and the relocation of human populations disturb long-standing feeding habits. The vampire community in Northern California's Blood Farm Collective represents one imagined response to global warming. Deathless beings build sustainable communities capable of enduring ecological collapse while maintaining ethical feeding through voluntary human partnerships. Climate change endangers vampires just as much as humans, says commune leader Dr. Elena Vasquez. Our existence depends on human civilization for camouflage, infrastructure, and blood sources. If society crumbles, we'll perish alongside our prey. Sustainability isn't just a moral choice, it's a matter of survival. Young adult vampire fiction continues advancing past the Twilight era. Models like author Danielle Clayton explore how vampire mythology intertwines with present-day issues of identity, social media, mental health, and racial justice. These new voices craft vampire tales that mirror the varied experiences of today's American adolescents. Clayton's Undead navigate high school social ranks while managing supernatural hunger, familial pressures, and the difficulty of preserving human ties when core aspects of identity must stay hidden. Her work illustrates how vampire fiction can address teenage realities without sacrificing genre depth or moral ambiguity. The horizon of American vampire literature looks increasingly varied. Writers from marginalized backgrounds contribute fresh viewpoints to familiar themes, while preserving the genre's key elements of predation, transformation, and ethical complexity. These contemporary voices ensure vampire literature keeps evolving with American culture, rather than remaining trapped in old molds. Academics such as Dr. Margot Collins at the University of Pennsylvania have started serious literary critiques of vampire fiction's role in shaping American culture, granting the genre academic legitimacy and highlighting its contributions to discussions about power, identity, and social progress. Vampire fiction offers a unique window into American anxieties across eras, Dr. Collins explains at a Gothic literature conference. From early settlers' dread of the wilderness and divine retribution to modern fears of technology and surveillance, vampires consistently embody what Americans most fear about themselves and their society. The financial success of vampire literature has opened publishing doors for diverse voices, while also sustaining a market for novel approaches to classic themes. This economic backing ensures the genre's ongoing evolution and provides platforms for authors who might otherwise be shut out of mainstream publishing. Digital publishing platforms have made vampire literature creation more accessible, letting independent writers experiment with forms and subjects that traditional publishers might deem too risky. This technological shift creates space for vampire stories reflecting the full spectrum of American experiences, not just marketing-driven cliches. Audio fiction, interactive media, and transmedia storytelling introduce new formats for vampire narratives that leverage digital tools while preserving the genre's core emotional resonance. These innovations suggest vampire literature will keep adapting to new media without losing its fundamental appeal. The global spread of American vampire fiction through translations and international media creates feedback loops, where foreign vampire traditions inspire American writers, and American vampire concepts influence worldwide supernatural storytelling. This cultural exchange fosters ongoing innovation and cross-pollination of ideas. Looking ahead at the future of American vampire literature, we see a genre that has successfully transformed from colonial folktales into contemporary digital narratives, while retaining its essential role as a mirror for America's fears, desires, and contradictions. The vampires of tomorrow will surely reflect whatever challenges America faces next: climate change, technological upheaval, social transformation, or threats we haven't yet imagined. But whatever shapes they take, American vampires will continue to fulfill their vital literary purpose. These entities uncover hidden truths about human nature that find their only expression in the metaphor of monsters, simultaneously alluring and horrifying, recognizable yet foreign, enticing yet revolting. They endure as our finest literary hunters because they mirror our own duality: the power to create and destroy, to love and to be cruel, to hope and to despair. No matter their shape, American vampires will persist in fulfilling their vital role in literature. They lay bare the truths of human nature that can only be articulated through the image of beings that are both attractive and terrifying, intimate and alien, charming and repellent. They stand as our ultimate literary predators, reflecting our own ability to both build and ruin, to show affection and inflict cruelty, to cling to hope and succumb to despair. And thus, our voyage through the blood-soaked terrain of American vampire tales reaches its close. Yet, the beings we have encountered continue their immortal chase across the pages of books yet to be penned. From the icy burial grounds of colonial New England to the digital networks of our connected era, American vampires have shifted to mirror our nation's evolving fears while retaining their primal thirst for human life and connection. What marks American vampires, as distinct from their global cousins? They personify the central contradictions of the American experience, the friction between personal liberty and societal duty, between novelty and heritage, between the promise of starting anew and the burden of historical guilt. They are immigrants compelled to navigate unfamiliar realities, predators operating within democratic structures, and monsters that mirror both our loftiest ambitions and our most profound embarrassments. From Mercy Brown's persecution in Rhode Island to the corporate boardrooms of Manhattan, from Anne Rice's romantic plantation bloodsuckers to Stephen King's tainted small towns, these beings have served as dark mirrors reflecting American unease about race, class, sexuality, technology, and authority. They illustrate what we might become if we surrender our humanity in the quest for our desires. If these sagas of American blood drinkers have granted you wisdom, subscribe to Obsidian Vault's explorations of Gothic horror worldwide. Contemplate how American vampire literature mirrors our national identity, and which of these stories will linger in your dreams until we reunite among the shadows of American Gothic imagination. Remember that the most frightening monsters are often those that promise to fulfill our deepest cravings in America. Even the damned hold on to hope for a fresh start. Even hunters chase the American dream, and even vampires can find redemption at a price. Pleasant dreams, dear audience, and never forget, in the land of opportunity, even death is merely another chance to transform.